So now joining me is Terry. Terry, thank you for taking the time to talk to me. I know you've been busy with talks and running around the place, so I appreciate you jumping in and chatting with me. And I want to kind of digest a little bit more of what you were talking about in your talks and what you've been kind of promoting. So when we talk about security and data, we could do many hours of conversation, but let's keep it short and say, what is the current state of when we're talking about security and data, especially from a cloud perspective as well?
So cloud data security in and of itself has always been a challenge for organizations. And so I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and what I will tell you is it is better today than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But the risks and the challenges have grown multifold with the things like you talked about. You talked about cloud. Out here we're talking about big data, we're talking about data lakes, managed data, all these sorts of things. Everything starts to introduce more risk, a change to behavior, a change of skill sets, etc. And so all of this modernization really has put a big burden, I think, on the security organization, who, to be fair, for years, if asked, would say, honestly, it's not their job.
Yeah.
They would say it's the DBA's job, it's the business function's job. In fact, I would ask CISOs who's responsible for data security, and only about 50% of them would say it's their job. The rest would point to somebody else and say, I buy the tools, they do the work.
Yes.
The reality is I think that's changed a bit. CISOs have taken responsibility of it, but you still see organizations that still have problems, and that comes down to, I think, technology as well as a prior expectation of what data security was, which traditionally the expectation was that data security was complex, it's very hard, very expensive, and very heavy when it comes to the amount of, I'm going to say quotes, equipment, but virtual or otherwise, the stuff that you have to use to do it with.
Yeah.
Technology, like your databases, like cloud, has modernized, so is data security. So data security today doesn't have to be difficult. It's automated. It should be simple. It shouldn't be hard.
Yeah.
But I think getting organizations over the last 20-year hump of it's hard, it's complex, it's expensive, to where it is today, that's the big challenge we have today. And that's closing gaps, and that's the work that we're doing. But that's what I'm talking about in here, is making certain that you do three things. One thing is that you monitor absolutely everything. Don't just look at DBAs, you need to look at everybody. Make sure that whatever you're doing is going to do it for your old stuff, all your mainframes and everything that you used to think is important, but isn't bright and shiny anymore, not the cool thing. It needs to do all that, and it still needs to do the cloud as well. And then lastly, you have to have automation. You have to have something on there that's telling you, hey, look, I know you don't have the skill set. I know you're not an expert in data security. Let the technology do that for you.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting, obviously, when you got data in all different places as well, and then you're trying to manage all of these different areas, and then the finger pointing that you said is something that needs to get under control quickly, because it's very easy, isn't it, to go, that's their responsibility. So how would you advise organizations to really kind of get that under wraps? Does the CISO need to take more of a role in that, or does that need to be more of a understanding throughout the company culture, I'd say?
So it is interesting, I think, that some of the answers that I would get back from CISOs when I would ask who's responsible is they would say it's everybody's job. Mm-hmm. That's the very diplomatic answer of course it's everybody's job, but whose phone rings when somebody calls in and says, I've stolen 50 million of your records and I'm going to share it unless you pay me money? Yeah. The CISO's like, okay, my phone's probably going to ring, and so will legal, and so a few others. So the solution there, in my opinion, is there has to be a lot of collaboration. Then there already is collaboration. You've got a collaborative team in most organizations. That's your red team or your incident team or whatever, and it includes legal and risk, the CFO, sometimes the CEO, depending on the size, certainly security's in there, et cetera. So that same team needs to make certain that they're coming together and making certain that they're all being held accountable for the parts of that role that they have. And I'll give you an example. One of the parts of the presentations that I gave here this week talks about data security and then outlines all the things that are necessary in data security. That might be threat intelligence, it might be alert analysis, it's privacy, a DPO, a CPO, whatever it happens to be. It might be other elements in the organization, but everybody's got their part to play. And today I would say it's both on the organization to come together and do all of that, but at the same time it's also a responsibility of the vendors, ourselves, us, to say, can I do more of this rather than requiring the organization to go and buy 4 different products, have multiple people learn those products, and have different functions working within each of those different products, trying to do a part, which really just doesn't make sense. But today that's really the way it is you've got identity access management, you've got encryption, you've got privacy technologies, data security, they're all different technologies, they're all different skill sets, they're all different interfaces, and people can get lost in it.
Yeah, I think that's the key. People can get lost in it, and it's interesting when you do have so many factors to play in, because again, security, how many things could we be talking about right now to kind of get this under control? It's impossible, but those steps are the next thing that needs to be brought into the conversation. So in terms of that, when we're talking about reducing risk as much as possible, it's not able to get rid of it completely, of course not, but for organizations that are starting on their journey or organizations that are already there, what are the kind of key risk points that you would advise looking out for?
So I bundle it back to you need to be able to monitor everything.
Yeah.
And traditionally, when we thought about data, people said, I'm going to monitor my files and my databases and my semi-structured stuff, but I'm only going to monitor the people that have direct access to it. I'm not going to monitor the things that I technically trust, which are my applications. The reality is half of our business is protecting applications, because we know there's no way you should ever trust an application. Yeah. It's third-party code, it's supply chain, it's all these issues we talk about today. It's built upon that stack, that house of cards, that you should never trust that. So organizations have to realize that it's more than just monitoring people who connect into things. It's about monitoring the entities. And user and entity behavioral analytics. Yeah. They need to be able to monitor everything doing that. Technology today has caught up. That can be done, but organizations tend not to do it. At the same time, you need to have that technology that can cover the gambit of the databases you have today, and rapidly support the databases you're thinking about having tomorrow. Whatever database ABC, file server XYZ, it's not out there yet, but does your vendor have the capacity to keep up with that? And the last thing would be around automation. Yeah. Automation has to be there, because if you go to LinkedIn, you type in database security, you're going to find about 36,000 people in the world that claim to be database security experts. And I mean claim, because we know LinkedIn, they're claiming it. But the point is there just aren't that many. You compare that to network security, there's 1.5 million people who say they're network security. So the expertise doesn't exist out there, so automation technology has to fill that gap. The last thing I'll say is when we think about risk, don't try to boil the ocean. You will not get to zero risk. You will get to acceptable risk, and you need to understand what your acceptable risk is. Yeah. It's not, I will lose zero records. What could you lose, and let's work within that framework so that the technology works within your business, so that your business can do its business, and the security can be as secure as it needs to be within the framework of your legal's acceptable risk.
Okay. Fantastic advice to end on. Terry, thank you for talking to me, giving that advice to companies. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Max.